JavaScript was created to improve the user's experience, specifically with forms, because at the time, form field validation had to be done on the server. There was just no other option. And on a dial-up connection, well, it could take a while. So fast forward almost 30 years and we still use JavaScript to enhance the user's experience with our forms. Except that now we can do so much more. I am Jeremy McPeak with Envato Tuts Plus, and in this tutorial I will show you how you can use jQuery to submit a form without refreshing the page. But first, if you are looking to create a professional website or you want to add features to make your website stand out, then head over to CodeCanyon, the marketplace for high-quality JavaScript and PHP components, HTML5 and mobile templates, and so much more. The items at CodeCanyon can help you easily add the functionality and eye-popping visuals that you need to meet your business's goals. You'll find a massive library that contains thousands of JavaScript and PHP components and almost 20,000 HTML and mobile templates. Needless to say, you'll find what you're looking for to take your site to the next level. Submitting a form with JavaScript is relatively straightforward. We just need to collect all of the form data and then format that data into the appropriate format, and then we just submit it. Now, submitting that data means that we need to specify the type of request as well as where we are sending that data to, or the URL. So there's a lot of things that we have to do because, well, we are doing it. If we submit a form through JavaScript, we are taking that responsibility from the browser, which means that we have to do everything that the browser normally would. And that sounds like a lot of work, and it is if you're writing just vanilla JavaScript. But jQuery is going to really make a lot of that easier. So let's first of all go over the markup, because there are some important things that we need in order to use jQuery to make our lives easier. First of all, we are pulling in jQuery. That kind of goes without saying, doesn't it? And then we have jQuery validation. Now, this is not a requirement. However, remember that a form is a very interactive experience. The user is clicking on things, typing things, and then ultimately they're going to submit the form. So there's a lot of opportunity to provide feedback to the user. And as far as validation is concerned, yes, we could rely upon the built-in browser validation, but why? We can provide a better experience using jQuery validation, and a lot of the CSS here is for that specific purpose. So then we get to the actual meat and potatoes of our form. We have this div element with an ID of contact form, and it contains everything here on screen. So on the left-hand side, we have the form itself, and then we have some welcome content on the right-hand side. And all of that is contained inside of this contact form. The reason being is because whenever the user submits this, we are going to replace everything here on screen with a thank you message. So we will essentially replace all of the HTML inside of this contact form div element. And once again, jQuery is going to make that a whole lot easier. So then we have the form itself. Now there's action, but it doesn't have a value. And notice that the method attribute is also missing. The reason is because since we are submitting the form with JavaScript, we have to write the code that is actually going to specify that information. So on the surface, it doesn't make a lot of sense to include that in the markup, but there's some tricks that will make your life a lot easier, which we will talk about here in a few moments. But then we get into the actual form fields, and we have three. We have one for the user's name, their email address, and then an optional field for their phone number. But the important thing about each one of these fields is that they have the name and the ID attributes. Now, this seems redundant, especially because they have the same values. However, jQuery is going to rely upon these two attributes to automatically, well, essentially serialize a form so that it collects the data and puts it into the correct format. So as you are writing your forms, add the name and the ID attributes to your form fields, and jQuery will do the rest of the work there. So with saying that, let's just go ahead and let's start writing our code. So we're going to wrap all of our code with a function just to protect it from the global scope. And the first thing that we will do is set up the form validation plugin. All we have to do is call the validate method, and we're good to go there. But then we need to write the code that's going to handle the form submit event. Now, you could make the argument that we could listen for the click event on the submit button. However, no, we are submitting a form. It makes much more sense to listen for the submit event on the form. So let's go ahead, let's set up that event. So we will listen for the submit event, and then we will have our event handler function. And the first thing we are going to do is prevent the browser from submitting the form. And we will do that by calling the prevent default method on our event object. Now, this is very important because we don't want the browser to submit the form. We are writing the code that's going to do that. And where we call prevent default is also very important, because there's going to be some code that you will see it called at the very end of the event handler. And that's a very dangerous place, because there could be an error that occurs before that line executes. And if that error is not properly handled, well, then the browser is going to submit the form, because prevent default will never execute. So the very first thing that you should do inside of your event handler is prevent the browser from submitting the form. Then we can collect the data from the form, and we will do that by using jQuery. We're going to wrap the form object, which is represented as the this variable here, because we are inside of the submit event listener for the form object, and we are going to simply call serialize. jQuery is going to handle everything else. It's going to collect all of the form information and put it into the appropriate format, so that then all we have to do is send that, and we will do so with the AJAX method. Now we need to specify the type of request, so we will do that with the type property. We'll make a post request here. We also need to specify the URL for where we want to send that request. So that for me is going to be bin/process.php. And then we need to specify the data, which is our data string. Now, that's the bare bones. We could walk away from here and we would be submitting the form with JavaScript. However, we want to provide some feedback for the user. Whenever they submit the form, we want them to know that they submitted the form. So we could use the success handle here, so that on a successful submission, then we will change the content of this div with an ID of contact form. So we will do just that. Let's select that element, and then we are going to change its HTML. We will just have a div with an ID of message. And inside of this div element, we are going to have two things. We will have an h2 element that will basically say that the contact form is submitted. And then we will append to that a paragraph. And this will have a little bit more information, like we will be in touch. But then let's also add some pizzazz here. Let's hide this so that we can then fade it in over the course of a second and a half. So there we go. We can go to the browser. Let's refresh here. Let's enter a name. It doesn't matter. And let's enter something that's not an email. If we try to send it, then we can see that the jQuery validation plugin is doing its job. It's providing us a better user experience here. But let's then use an actual email address so that we can submit it. And voila, we can see that we submitted the form. And that's great. That's perfect. However, we now have code that is for this specific form, and we can't use this same code anywhere else because, once again, it's for this specific form. So what if we try to make this a little bit more flexible so that we could have a function that we could then use in any page for any form? And that would make our lives a whole lot easier. So let's write a function called sendData. And this is going to accept a jQuery object that it's wrapped around a form object. Now this is important because this is going to give us easy access to some very important things. First of all, we of course want to get the data that we are going to submit to the server. But then we also want to issue that request. And we need to know the type of request as well as where to send that request to. Well, the form already can provide that information. We have attributes for that explicit purpose. So for the action, we could go ahead and fill this out so that we are going to send that to bin/process.php. We could specify the method post in this case. So that inside of our send data function, now that that is part of the form, we can use that data from the form. So let's just copy and paste here. And instead of hard coding the type, we will just use what is specified in the method attribute. Then we will do the same thing for the URL, except that we will read the action attribute. And then we will provide the data. But then we need to do something for the success, because we could include success here. But remember that we want this to be as flexible as possible. We don't want anything that is specific for a particular form. So one thing we could do is return this, so that whenever we call AJAX, we're going to return the deferred object that the AJAX method returns. Now, if you're not familiar with a deferred object, it's very much like a promise, and it follows the promise pattern that's used in modern JavaScript programming, which means that whenever we call send data, what we will do then is follow that up by calling done. So our code then is going to look like this. We don't need this other code anymore. We have that send data function. So we're going to call send data. We will pass in the form object that's wrapped as a jQuery object that we want to work with. We will call done so that whenever the request is done, then we will update the UI with our welcome message. And there we go. So we have a function now that we can use for any form as long as it has the method and action attributes. And it is also flexible enough so that we can do something specific for this form without having to change the code of the send data function. So let's just very quickly test this. Let's fill out the form once again. And whenever we submit it, we have the same functionality. That data was sent, we got a response back, and we showed our thank you message. So when it comes to submitting a form with jQuery, the key thing to remember is to include the name and ID attributes on your form fields, because then jQuery will then grab all of the data from the form and serialize it into the appropriate format, so that then all you have to do is send it to the server. And it also doesn't hurt to have the action and method attributes on the form, because then you can write a generic function that you can use on any page for any form, and you don't have to keep writing the same code over and over again. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. If you liked this video and want to see more, be sure to subscribe to the Envato Tuts Plus YouTube channel. And of course, if you want to learn more, check out the other fantastic tutorials that Envato Tuts Plus has to offer. I'm Jeremy, and I will see you next time.